The observation deck overlooked the battlefield from a distance that should have felt safe. Queen Sithara stood with her hands clasped behind her back, watching the white medical tent in the neutral zone through reinforced glass. Her royal guard flanked her in perfect formation, their faces impassive behind ceremonial masks. The war had been dragging on for 3 cycles, and this was the first time either side had agreed to medical neutrality. She had come to see if humans could be trusted with such an arrangement. "Movement, Your Majesty," Guard Captain Varric said quietly. Below, a human medic emerged from the tent carrying someone on a stretcher. Even from this distance, Sithara could see the distinctive purple skin and elongated limbs of a Kale warrior, one of her own people. The figure wasn't moving. The stretcher was covered in blood. "They're killing our wounded," one of her advisors hissed. "Wait," Sithara said. The human medic was running, not away from the tent, but toward it again. Another human emerged, helping to carry the wounded Kale inside. The tent flaps closed. Silence stretched across the observation deck. Every eye watched those white canvas walls as if they could see through them. Minutes passed. The advisors whispered among themselves. Sithara said nothing. The tent flaps opened again. The same human medic stepped out, stripping off bloodied gloves. He turned and said something to someone inside. Then he went back to work on another patient outside, a human soldier this time, treating him with the same urgency. "He saved them," Sithara said quietly. "We cannot confirm that," her military advisor replied. "Then I will confirm it myself." The room went silent. Varric stepped forward, his voice careful. "Your Majesty, you cannot enter the battlefield. Protocol forbids me from dying. It says nothing about observation." She turned from the window. "Prepare a secure route. I want to be close enough to see their faces." 20 minutes later, Sithara stood behind a reinforced barrier only 50 meters from the medical tent. Her guards surrounded her in concentric circles, weapons ready but not raised. The humans had been notified of her presence. She could see them glancing in her direction, but they continued working. They did not stop. They did not salute. They saved lives instead. The human medic she'd been watching knelt beside a groaning Kale soldier. The soldier's arm was barely attached, held together by shredded tissue. The medic worked quickly, applying a tourniquet, injecting something that made the soldier's breathing steady. He spoke in halting, poorly pronounced KL. "Safe. Pain goes soon." The soldier's eyes focused on him, wide with confusion and terror. The medic kept talking, kept working. He didn't look afraid. He didn't look hateful. He looked tired and determined, the way someone looks when they've decided that death will not win today. A child's voice cut through the sound of distant artillery. "Why is he helping them?" Sithara turned. A human child stood at the edge of the barrier, no more than 7 cycles old, clutching a woman's hand. The woman tried to pull her away, but the child resisted, staring directly at Sithara. "Why is he helping the bad people?" the child asked again. The woman's face went pale. Varric moved forward, but Sithara raised a hand. She looked down at the child, then back at the medic, who had moved on to another wounded Kale. He was stitching now, his hand steady despite the chaos. "Because," Sithara said, lowering herself to one knee, "he does not see bad people. He sees hurt people." The child considered this. "But they hurt you?" "Yes." "And you hurt them?" "Yes." "So everybody's bad?" Sithara felt something shift inside her chest, a weight she hadn't known she was carrying. She watched the medic finish his stitching and move to the next patient. She watched him treat a human and a Kale with the same urgency, the same care, the same exhaustion. "No," she said quietly. "Everybody's hurt. And some people try to fix that." The child nodded, satisfied with this answer. The woman pulled her away quickly, bowing repeatedly. Sithara stood. She looked at Varric, then at the tent. "I want to speak with that medic," she said. "Your Majesty?" "Now, Captain, arrange it." Varric hesitated, then bowed. He crossed into the neutral zone alone, his weapon holstered, his hands visible. Sithara watched him approach the medic, watched them exchange words. The medic looked up at her. Even from here, she could see the exhaustion in his eyes. He said something to Varric, gestured to the wounded around him. Varric replied. The medic shook his head. Then he said something else, and Varric went very still. The captain returned, his expression carefully neutral. "He says he will speak with you after the wounded are stable. He asks that you wait. He says..." Varric paused. "He says if you are not too proud to wait, he is not too tired to talk." The advisors gasped. Such disrespect toward royalty could mean execution in Kale society. Sithara felt her own shock, then something else. Something that might have been respect. "Then I will wait," she said. She stood there for 3 hours while the medic worked. She did not sit. She did not retreat to comfort. She watched every patient he treated, every life he fought for, every moment he chose healing over hatred. When he finally approached her, still covered in blood, she saw that he could barely stand. "You wanted to talk?" he asked, his accent thick but his Kale words clear enough. "Yes," Sithara said. "I wanted to ask why. Why what? Why you save them. Why you save us." The medic looked back at his tent, at the wounded inside, at the mixture of human and Kale lying side by side. When he turned back, his eyes held something ancient and unbreakable. "Because someone has to," he said, "and it might as well be me." Sithara felt those words settle into her bones. She had come here expecting to find either cruelty or performance, some political maneuver dressed as compassion. Instead, she found something she had almost forgotten existed in this war. Genuine humanity. "What is your name?" she asked. "James Chen." "James Chen, I am Queen Sithara of the Kale Dominion." She paused, aware that what she was about to say could not be unsaid. "And I would like to offer you a position." He blinked slowly, swaying slightly on his feet. "A position?" "As Chief Medical Advisor to the Kale royal family. You would have unlimited resources, unlimited authority to establish medical protocols across both our forces. You could end this." She gestured to the battlefield. "All of this suffering." James stared at her. Then he started laughing, a broken, exhausted sound that might have been sobs if he had any tears left. "You're offering me a job?" "Yes. I've been awake for 37 hours. I have blood under my fingernails from people who were trying to kill each other yesterday. And you're offering me a job?" "Yes," he laughed again, shaking his head. "This is insane." "You're insane. I must be hallucinating." "You are not." "Then you're really serious." "I am." James looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked back at his tent, at the impossible mixture of former enemies now breathing because he refused to choose sides. When he turned back, something had changed in his expression. "If I say yes," he said slowly, "I have conditions." The advisors began to protest, but Sithara silenced them with a gesture. "Name them." "Medical neutrality becomes law on both sides, enforced by both sides. Any commander who violates it faces trial." "Agreed. All medical personnel get diplomatic immunity during treatment." "Both sides?" "Agreed. And I want this." He gestured to the tent. "This becomes the model. Mixed medical units. Humans and Kale working together, learning from each other." Sithara felt her hearts beat faster. What he was describing wasn't just medical reform. It was the first real integration since the war began. It was the foundation for something that might eventually become peace. "You ask for much," she said. "You offered first." She smiled, a small expression that felt strange after so many cycles of war. "So I did." "Then I agree to your terms, James Chen." She extended her hand, the traditional Kale gesture of binding agreement. James looked at it, then at her, confusion crossing his face. He reached out slowly, grasping her hand. His grip was weak from exhaustion, but steady. "Then we have an accord," Sithara said. Behind her, she heard Varix make a small sound. She glanced back and saw his eyes wide, his expression carefully controlled, but failing. The other guards looked similarly shocked. Her primary advisor had gone very pale. "Your Majesty," the advisor said quietly, "do you understand what you've just done?" "I have hired a medical advisor." "No, Your Majesty. You have. In our custom, the hand clasp, when performed by royalty with someone outside the court." He trailed off, looking genuinely distressed. "You have just proposed a bonding." Sithara froze. James still held her hand, oblivious to the sudden tension. "A what?" James asked. "A bonding," Varix said carefully. "Similar to what humans call marriage. By accepting the Queen's hand in that manner, you have accepted her proposal."
James dropped her hand as if burned.
"What? I thought we were shaking on the deal." "You were," the advisor said. "But in Kale custom, when performed by the Queen herself, a hand clasp is a bonding offer. It is binding." "Binding?" James looked between them, his exhaustion replaced by panic. "As in, we're married now?" "Not yet," Sithara said, her mind racing through decades of royal protocol. "The hand clasp is the proposal. The bonding ceremony would follow, but the proposal, once made and accepted, cannot be retracted without—" She trailed off. "Without what?" James demanded, without declaring one party unworthy of the crown, which would require proof of dishonor or cowardice. She looked at him, at this human who had spent hours saving her people while his own people bled around him. I do not think I can make that case. James sat down heavily on the ground, all the exhaustion crashing back into him at once. I just wanted to save people, he said. How did this turn into a marriage proposal? Sithara found herself sitting beside him, propriety forgotten. Her guards shifted nervously, but she ignored them. She looked at this human medic who had accidentally agreed to bond with an alien queen because neither of them had thought to check the cultural customs first. I apologize, she said quietly. I should have been more clear about our traditions, and I should have asked before grabbing the queen's hand, James replied. He laughed again, that same broken sound. My mother always said I didn't think before acting. Guess she was right. They sat in silence for a moment, the absurdity of the situation settling around them. In the distance, artillery fired. In the tent behind them, wounded soldiers from both sides breathed because one exhausted human refused to let them die. And between them, a proposal neither had meant to make hung in the air, binding them through custom they hadn't understood. James asked finally. Sithara considered the question. She thought about the political implications, the scandal, the impossibility of a human bonding with Kale royalty. She thought about her advisor's horror, her court's reaction, the diplomatic nightmare this would create. Then she thought about the child's question. Why is he helping the bad people? Because he doesn't see bad people. He sees hurt people. She needed someone like that beside her. Someone who saw past the categories that had defined this war. Someone who chose healing over hatred even when it made no sense, even when it exhausted him, even when no one would have blamed him for walking away. Now, she said slowly, we figure out how to make this work. James turned to look at her, surprise clear in his expression. You're serious? You actually want to go through with this? I offered you a position because I saw something in you that this war needs. That changes nothing. The method of binding may be unconventional, but the reasoning remains sound. The reasoning is sound? James shook his head. You're talking about marriage, not a business deal. In my position, they are often the same thing. He studied her face, looking for something. And is that what you want? A political arrangement? Sithara paused. It was the first time in 3 cycles anyone had asked what she wanted rather than what the crown needed. I want, she said carefully, to stop watching my people die in a war that has forgotten why it started. I want to build something better than what we've destroyed, and I want... She hesitated. I want to believe that the man who saved my soldiers' lives while his own people bled is the kind of man who might help me do that. James was quiet for a long moment. Then he stood, offering her his hand to help her up. She took it, letting him pull her to her feet. This time both of them knew what the gesture meant. If we do this, he said, I have more conditions. More conditions for a bonding? Varric said, his voice strangled. This is highly irregular. Everything about this is irregular, James replied. Might as well embrace it. He looked at Sithara. I want your word that you actually want to end this war.
Not just win it.
Peace. Real peace. You have it, Sithara said without hesitation. And I want your word that if this bonding thing happens, it's because we both choose it, not because protocol demands it. I'm not going to be your political prisoner disguised as a husband. She felt something warm in her chest, a feeling she couldn't quite name. You have that as well? Then I guess we're doing this. He swayed again, catching himself against one of her guards. First, Sithara said, catching his arm, you are going to sleep. Varrics, have quarters prepared for James in the diplomatic wing. Full honors, full security. He is to be treated as... She paused, then committed to the word, as my intended. The title sent a ripple through the assembled guards and advisors. James seemed too tired to fully process it. He nodded vaguely and let 2 guards support him toward the transport vehicles. Sithara watched him go. This human who had accidentally proposed to a queen while covered in battlefield blood and running on exhaustion. Then she turned to her primary advisor, whose expression promised a very long conversation about propriety and politics. Not one word, she said before he could begin. We will discuss this after I have contacted the council. The council will never approve, the advisor said quietly. Then they will learn what the handclasp truly means, Sithara replied. Is it binding, is it not, by our own law? The advisor closed his eyes. Yes, Your Majesty. Then it is done. She walked toward her transport, her mind already racing through the political storms ahead. She had come here to observe a medical experiment. She was leaving betrothed to the human performing it. The absurdity should have bothered her more than it did. Instead, she found herself thinking about the way James had spoken to that wounded Kale soldier, his terrible accent making the words of comfort almost unintelligible, but his tone conveying everything that mattered. Safe, you safe. Pain go soon. Perhaps that was what her people needed. What all of them needed. Someone willing to speak comfort in a broken accent, to reach across the gap between enemy forces, to choose healing even when hatred would have been easier. And if she had accidentally bound herself to such a person through a cultural misunderstanding, perhaps that was simply fate correcting the mistake she didn't know she'd been making. She settled into her transport and looked back at the medical tent one last time. The white canvas glowed in the afternoon light, a small spot of neutrality in a battlefield that had known nothing but sides for 3 cycles. Inside, humans and Kale lay side by side, breathing because one exhausted medic had decided their lives mattered more than their allegiance. Tomorrow, the political storms would begin. Tomorrow, she would face her council and defend the indefensible. Tomorrow, the war would continue with all its complexities and cruelties. But today, she had found something unexpected in this medical tent. Not just a skilled medic or a political opportunity. She had found hope, and she had accidentally proposed to it. The transport lifted off, carrying her back toward the palace and the impossible task of explaining to her court that their queen had just bound herself to a human medic through a cultural misunderstanding that was technically completely legal and absolutely irreversible. Varric sat across from her, his expression carefully neutral. After several minutes of silence, he spoke. Your Majesty? Yes, Captain. For what it is worth, I think you made the right choice. Sithara looked at him in surprise. Varric was the most protocol-bound member of her guard. The one who quoted law and custom in his sleep. Explain, she said. I watched him work for 3 hours. He saved 14 Kale soldiers today. 14 of our people who would have died, who he had no obligation to save, who belonged to the force that killed his comrades. Varric paused. If such a man has accidentally bound himself to our queen, perhaps we should consider it a gift rather than a disaster. The council will not see it that way. The council did not watch him choose Kale lives over his own exhaustion. You did. I did, and that matters. Sithara felt a fierce gratitude for this man who had served her family for 2 decades, who understood when to follow protocol and when to acknowledge that something larger was at stake. Thank you, Captain, she said quietly. Just promise me one thing, Your Majesty. What is that? That when the bonding ceremony happens, someone explains human customs to him first. I do not think our kingdom can survive another cross-cultural incident of this magnitude. Despite everything, Sithara laughed. It was a small sound, almost foreign after so long at war, but it felt good. Agreed, Captain. I will ensure James understands every gesture before the ceremony. And perhaps we should ask him to teach us human customs as well. If we are to have a human in the royal family, the court should understand his culture. Sithara considered this. It was a radical suggestion, implying that human customs might be worth learning, worth respecting. It suggested that integration could flow both ways, that her people might adapt to him as much as he adapted to them. Make it so, she said. Add it to the bonding terms. Cultural exchange. True exchange. Not just him learning our ways. Varric bowed his head. Yes, Your Majesty. The transport flew on toward the palace, carrying the queen who had left that morning to observe a medical experiment and was returning betrothed to its architect. Behind them, in a white tent in the neutral zone, patients breathed and healed without regard for which side of the war they had been born into. And in the diplomatic quarters of the palace, a human medic slept the deep sleep of exhaustion, unaware that he had accidentally agreed to marry an alien queen and, in doing so, had set in motion changes that would reshape both their peoples. When James woke 16 hours later in a bed larger than his entire tent, wearing clothes softer than anything he owned, in a room that seemed designed for someone much more important than a field medic, his first thought was that he'd died and this was some kind of strange afterlife. His second thought was that he'd actually agreed to marry the Kale Queen. His third thought was that he needed to find someone who could explain what exactly he'd agreed to, because bonding could mean anything from a political alliance to actually sharing lives, and he really needed to know which one he'd signed up for. He found his boots, cleaned and repaired, beside the bed. His medic's jacket hung on a stand, also cleaned. the bloodstains removed with a care that made his chest tight. Someone had taken the time to restore his things while he slept. Someone had cared about the small details that would make him feel less lost in this foreign place. The door opened before he could reach it. Varric stood there in formal armor rather than the battle gear from yesterday. "Good, you are awake," the captain said. "The Queen requests your presence for morning meal. If you are recovered enough." "I'm recovered. I'm also confused as hell. Do you people have coffee, or something like coffee? We have keves. It is bitter and caffeinated. Will that suffice?" "Perfect." Varric led him through corridors that seemed designed to remind visitors how small they were compared to the power they served. The ceilings soared overhead, carved with histories James couldn't read. Windows showed gardens that looked like they belonged in paintings rather than real life. Everything was beautiful and overwhelming and utterly foreign. "Captain?" James said as they walked. "Yes? Can you explain what exactly I agreed to yesterday? Because I'm getting the sense that bonding means more than just a political arrangement." Varric was quiet for several paces. Then, "A bonding is complex. It is political, yes, but it is also personal. The bonded pair share authority, share counsel, share..." He paused. "Share lives in all the ways that phrase implies. So we'd actually be married. Not just politically allied. Though how you choose to define the personal aspects is between you and the Queen. Royal bondings are often more flexible than common ones. You would have your own quarters, your own staff, your own authority, but you would also be expected to appear together at ceremonies, to make decisions together, to present a unified front to both your people and hers." James absorbed this. "And if we can't stand each other after a few months, then you would do what many royals have done throughout history, maintain appearances in public while living separate lives in private. It is not ideal, but it is acceptable." That sounds depressing. "It is why most royal bondings are arranged carefully over many months, with extensive negotiation and compatibility assessment. What you did yesterday," Varric's tone carried something that might have been amusement, "what you did yesterday is unprecedented." They reached a door that opened into a private dining room. Sithara sat at a table designed for intimacy rather than state business. 2 places set, morning light streaming through windows that overlooked the gardens. She stood when he entered. Today she wore simpler clothes, still elegant but not the formal regalia from yesterday. She looked younger without the weight of crown and ceremony. "James," she said, "I hope you slept well. Better than I have in months. Your beds are dangerously comfortable." She smiled, a small expression that transformed her face. "Please sit. We have much to discuss." Varric withdrew, closing the door behind him. James sat across from her, accepting a cup of the keves his servant poured. It was indeed bitter and caffeinated and exactly what he needed. "So," he said after a long drink, "we're engaged." "We are. Because I didn't understand the cultural significance of shaking hands. Because neither of us explained our customs before making binding gestures, yes." James laughed, shaking his head. "This is insane." "I am aware." She poured her own keves. "I spent much of the night with my advisors. They are concerned. I bet. They believe you will destabilize the monarchy. They believe a human cannot possibly understand Kale politics well enough to share authority. They believe this bonding will undermine my legitimacy and possibly trigger a succession crisis. Well, when you put it that way, I can see their point. They may be correct," Sithara continued. "This could become a disaster. The precedent alone is staggering. A human in the royal family, sharing authority over Kale policy, representing our people to the galaxy." She looked at him directly. "Are you frightened?" "Terrified," James admitted. "I'm a field medic. Yesterday morning, my biggest problem was running out of antiseptic. Now I'm accidentally engaged to an alien queen and apparently expected to help rule an interstellar empire. So yeah, pretty scared." "Good." He blinked. "Good. If you were not frightened, I would doubt your intelligence." "This is terrifying, but..." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "I watched you yesterday. You moved between human and Kale, wounded with the same urgency, the same care. You spoke terrible Kale with a sincere accent. You worked until you could barely stand because stopping would mean someone died. And when I offered you authority, you demanded conditions that would protect others before yourself. So I have spent 3 cycles surrounded by people who seek power for its own sake, who see this war as an opportunity for advancement, who measure victory in territory gained rather than lives preserved. And in one afternoon, I met someone who measured victory differently." She leaned forward. "I need that perspective beside me." Not as an advisor I can dismiss, not as a consultant I can ignore. As an equal partner who can challenge my decisions, who sees the world from a fundamentally different angle, who values what I have been taught to overlook. James set down his cup. You're saying you actually want this? Not just accepting it because protocol demands it? I am saying that what began as an accident might become an opportunity, if we choose to make it one. They looked at each other across the table, two people from different worlds trying to decide if they could build something together from a foundation of misunderstanding and exhaustion. I have conditions, James said finally. You made some yesterday. Do you have more? Yeah. First, I keep practicing medicine. I'm not giving that up to become a full-time royal. Agreed. In fact, I insist upon it. Your medical authority was part of the original offer. Second, I want honesty between us, not political maneuvering, not careful diplomatic language. If this is going to work, we need to actually talk to each other. Sithara nodded slowly. That will be difficult. I have been trained since childhood in the art of diplomatic speech, but I agree to try. Third, I want to actually get to know you before we commit to this permanently. Cultural misunderstanding or not, I'm not marrying someone I've had one conversation with. Give me time to figure out if we can actually stand each other. How much time? A few months. Long enough to have more than 3 conversations. The council will pressure us to formalize the bonding quickly to prevent uncertainty. Then the council can wait. This is our lives, not their political chess game. Cythera smiled again, wider this time. You are going to be very disruptive to the court. Is that a problem? No, she said. I think it is exactly what we need. A servant entered with breakfast, placing dishes between them. The food was unfamiliar but smelled appealing. James realized he hadn't eaten in over a day. As they ate, Cythara explained the basics of Kale governance, the power structures James would need to navigate, the factions within the court that would either support or oppose their bonding. She spoke clearly without condescension, treating him as an intelligent partner rather than an ignorant outsider. In turn, James told her about his work, about the medical challenges of treating species with different biologies, about his hope that mixed medical units could become a foundation for broader cooperation. He talked about the wounded he'd treated, both human and Kale, and how pain looked the same regardless of which side of the war you came from. They talked for 2 hours, long after the breakfast was finished. And somewhere in that conversation, James realized that he actually liked this woman. She was sharp and thoughtful, burdened by responsibility but not crushed by it, willing to challenge tradition when it conflicted with necessity. Can I ask you something personal? He said eventually. Yes. Why did you really come to the medical tent yesterday? You could have sent observers. You didn't need to be there in person. Cythara was quiet for a moment, because I was tired of making decisions about the war from a distance. I wanted to see with my own eyes whether humans could be trusted, whether this medical neutrality was genuine or performance. She paused. I wanted to see if there was any hope left in this war. Any sign that we might find a way forward that didn't require complete destruction of the other side. And did you find it? I found a human medic who saved 14 Kale soldiers while his own people died around him. So yes, I found hope. She looked at him, and then I accidentally proposed to it. James laughed. Well, Hope probably didn't expect to get a marriage proposal. No, I imagine Hope is as surprised as we are. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. Then James said, Okay, let's try this. Give me those few months to figure out if we can actually build something together. Teach me your culture. I'll teach you mine. We'll figure out if this accident can become something intentional, and if it can't, he shrugged. Then we'll face that when we get there. Cythara extended her hand across the table, then caught herself. Perhaps we should find a different gesture for agreements. Probably wise. James offered a different gesture, a human fist bump that made her laugh. She mimicked it awkwardly. We are going to create so many diplomatic incidents, she said. Probably. But at least they'll be interesting ones. The door opened and Varix entered, his expression carefully neutral. Your Majesty, the Council has requested an emergency session. They wish to discuss the situation. The situation? Cythara repeated dryly. How diplomatic of them. She stood. Tell them I will meet with them in 1 hour, and James will accompany me. Varix's eyes widened slightly. Your Majesty, perhaps it would be better if I faced them alone? No, Captain. If they wish to discuss my bonding, they will discuss it with both parties present. James, are you prepared to face a room of very angry Kale politicians who think you are destroying their civilization? James stood, draining the last of his kavas. I've faced emergency rooms full of critical patients with no supplies and no backup. I think I can handle some upset politicians. Excellent. Then let us go teach the council that some accidents are worth embracing. They walked together through those vast corridors, a human medic and a Kale Queen, heading toward a confrontation that would determine whether an accidental proposal could become the foundation for something larger. Behind them, in the medical tent still operating in the neutral zone, humans and Kale continued to work side by side, proving that cooperation was possible when survival depended on it. And ahead of them, in a council chamber filled with tradition and resistance to change, waited the first real test of whether that cooperation could extend beyond the battlefield into the halls of power. The council chamber was circular, with seats rising in tiers around a central floor where Cythera and James stood. 50 council members looked down at them, their expressions ranging from hostile to merely skeptical. The silence was heavy, weighted with judgment, and barely contained anger. Chancellor Kevros spoke first, his voice carrying the authority of 3 decades in office. Your Majesty, this council has served your family with loyalty and dedication for generations. We have supported your decisions even when we disagreed. But this, he gestured at James, this we cannot accept without explanation. You have bound yourself to a human through accident, and now you ask us to accept this as legitimate policy? To accept that this outsider will share authority over our people? I do not ask you to accept anything, Cythera replied calmly. I inform you of what has already occurred. The bonding proposal was made and accepted according to our own law. What remains is for this council to decide how we proceed from this foundation. Foundation? Another counselor stood, her tone sharp. You call a diplomatic disaster a foundation? Your Majesty, with respect, you have created a crisis of legitimacy. How can our people trust a monarchy that binds itself to the enemy? I'm not the enemy, James said quietly. The chamber went silent. 50 pairs of eyes turned to him. I said I'm not the enemy. I'm a medic. Yesterday I saved 14 Kale lives. Last week I saved 23 human lives. The week before that, 9 KL, 17 human. I don't keep track of sides anymore. I keep track of whether people breathe when I'm done with them. Noble sentiments, Kevros said coldly. But they do not qualify you to share authority over an interstellar empire. You're right. They don't. I don't know your laws. I barely speak your language. And I'm pretty sure I've already violated about 12 different protocols just by being in this room. But here's what I do know. I know how to fix what's broken. And your empire? It's broken. Mine too. We've been breaking each other for 3 cycles and calling it strategy. He turned slowly, addressing the entire chamber. I didn't ask to be here. I didn't ask to accidentally propose to your queen. But I'm here now, and you can either spend your time trying to undo what's already done, or you can use this accident to try something different. Something that might actually lead to fewer people bleeding out in my tent while politicians argue about territory. And what would you suggest? A counselor asked, her tone dripping with sarcasm. That we simply surrender? I'd suggest you start by admitting that this war doesn't have a winner. Just 2 sides destroying each other at an ever-increasing rate. I'd suggest that having a human in your royal family might actually be a bridge toward negotiation instead of escalation. And I'd suggest that maybe, just maybe, the cultural accident that brought me here is an opportunity you didn't know you needed. The chamber erupted. Counselors shouted over each other, some in anger, some in what might have been agreement. Cythera let them argue for several minutes before raising her hand for silence. Enough, she said, and the authority in her voice cut through the noise. Chancellor Kevros raises a valid concern about legitimacy. So let me be clear about the terms of this bonding. She began outlining the agreement she and James had discussed. The medical reforms, the cultural exchange, the trial period before formal bonding. With each point, she made clear that this was not a surrender of Kale authority, but an expansion of it, bringing in perspectives that could strengthen rather than weaken their position. The debate lasted 4 hours. Counselors challenged every point, demanded safeguards, insisted on limitations to James's authority. Through it all, Cythera negotiated with patience and precision, giving ground on minor points while holding firm on the core of the agreement. James watched her work with growing respect. This was a different person than the one who had shared breakfast with him, though no less genuine. This was the queen in her element, navigating political currents with skill he could barely follow. She defended him without making him seem weak, acknowledged legitimate concerns without backing down from her decision, and gradually shifted the chamber from outrage to reluctant acceptance. Finally, as afternoon light slanted through the high windows, Kevros stood once more. Your Majesty, This council cannot pretend to be pleased with this situation, but we acknowledge that the bonding proposal was made and accepted according to law. We therefore propose the following compromise. James Chen will be accepted as your bonded partner with the understanding that his authority in Kale affairs is advisory rather than absolute. He will undergo training in Kale law, custom, and governance, and the formal bonding ceremony will be delayed for 6 months, during which time his suitability for this role will be assessed by this council. Assessed how? Sithara asked. He will be given specific tasks and responsibilities. If he demonstrates understanding and respect for our ways, if he proves himself capable of thinking beyond human interests to consider Kale needs, then we will support the formal bonding. If he fails, Kevros let the implication hang. If I fail, the bonding is dissolved and I go back to being a medic, James said. That's the deal? Essentially, yes. James looked at Sithara. She met his eyes, and he saw the question there. This wasn't the agreement they discussed. It gave the council power to judge him, to potentially override her choice if they decided he wasn't suitable. It put him on trial. But it also gave them 6 months to prove that this could work. I accept, James said. The chamber stirred with surprise. Kevros' eyebrows rose. You accept being evaluated by this council? Why not? You're right to be concerned. I am an outsider. I don't understand your ways. Putting me on trial for 6 months gives me time to learn while giving you assurance that if I really am a disaster, there's an exit strategy. Seems reasonable. You understand this will not be a gentle evaluation, another counselor said. We will test you rigorously. Good. I'd rather know now if I'm actually capable of this role than fail spectacularly after it's too late to back out. Sithara stepped forward. Then let it be recorded. James Chen of Humanity is accepted as the Queen's bonded partner, subject to 6 months evaluation by this council. During this time, he will undergo training and assessment. At the end of 6 months, this council will vote on whether to approve the formal bonding ceremony. If they approve, the bonding becomes permanent. If they refuse, the arrangement is dissolved. She turned to James. And if they refuse, you will be treated with honor and given safe passage to whatever life you choose, with the gratitude of the Crown for your service during this time. Agreed, James said. Then we have accord, Kevros said, though he didn't sound happy about it. This council will prepare the evaluation criteria. Your Majesty, I suggest you ensure your chosen partner understands what he's agreed to. I will. The council began to disperse, councillors clustering in groups to discuss what had just happened. James stood in the center of the chamber feeling slightly numb. In the space of 24 hours, he'd accidentally gotten engaged, negotiated marriage terms with an alien queen, and agreed to be put on trial by her entire government. Well, he said as Sithara led him out of the chamber, that went better than I expected. She looked at him incredulously. Better? Nobody tried to have me executed. In my experience, that counts as a diplomatic success. Despite herself, Sithara laughed. Your standards are alarmingly low. Field medic, remember? My standards are patient still breathing. Everything else is a bonus. They walked back through the corridors, Varix following at a respectful distance. The afternoon was fading into evening, painting the palace in shades of amber and shadow. You understand what you've agreed to? Sithara asked quietly. 6 months of constant scrutiny, impossible standards, counselors looking for any excuse to declare you unsuitable. Yeah, I also understand that it's fair. I am an outsider. I don't know what I'm doing. Giving them a way to evaluate me objectively is better than just forcing them to accept me and dealing with resentment forever. You could have fought it. Could have insisted on your rights according to the bonding law. And created enemies from day one? No thanks. This way, if I succeed, I'll have earned their respect. If I fail, at least we'll know it wasn't for lack of trying. She stopped walking and turned to face him fully. I chose well, she said quietly. Yesterday was an accident, but today, seeing how you handled the council, understanding how you think, today I would choose you deliberately. James felt something warm in his chest, a flutter of possibility. Ask me again in 6 months, after I've failed half their tests and embarrassed you at some formal dinner. I will hold you to that, Sithara said. They reached his quarters, larger than the ones he'd woken in, with windows overlooking the gardens and a desk already set up with materials on Kale governance and culture. Your education begins tomorrow, Sithara said, gesturing to the materials. Council members will arrive to tutor you in various subjects. They will not be gentle. Good. You keep saying that. Because I mean it. If I'm going to do this, I'm going to do it right. Teach me everything I need to know. Test me as hard as you want. I'd rather fail honestly than succeed through lowered standards. Cythera studied him for a long moment. Then she reached out, carefully this time, and touched his arm. It was a gentle gesture, nothing like yesterday's hand clasp. "Thank you," she said, "for being willing to try this. For not running when you realized what you'd agreed to. Where would I run to? I've got a tent full of medical supplies and 14 Kale soldiers who would probably be confused about where their weird human doctor went. Besides," he smiled, "I'm curious to see if an accident can become something intentional. As am I." She left him then, and James stood in his new quarters surrounded by materials on alien governance and culture, preparing for 6 months of scrutiny and evaluation that would determine whether a field medic could become part of an alien royal family. In the medical tent in the neutral zone, mixed units of human and Kale medics continued their work, learning from each other, saving lives without regard for sides. News of the Queen's bonding had already reached them, spreading through both forces like wildfire. And, somewhere between the chaos of accidentally proposing to a queen and the quiet certainty that he'd made the right choice, James Chen began to understand that he hadn't just saved 14 Kale soldiers yesterday, he'd saved a chance for something better. A bridge between species, built on the foundation of a cultural misunderstanding and maintained by the stubborn belief that healing mattered more than hatred. The 6 months ahead would be difficult. He would fail, stumble, make mistakes that would embarrass both himself and Cythera, but he would try. And sometimes trying was enough. In the gardens below his window, evening flowers bloomed in colors he had no names for. Tomorrow his education would begin. Tomorrow the scrutiny would intensify. Tomorrow he would start proving that an accident could become a choice, that a mistake could become an opportunity, that a human medic and an alien queen could build something together that neither could have built alone. But tonight he simply stood at the window and watched alien flowers bloom in an alien garden, preparing for a life he had never imagined and would never have chosen, yet somehow felt exactly right, because someone had to bridge the gap between their worlds.